Thanks for joining us today. I'm Warren Kurtzman of Coleman Insights, and in a few moments I will be joined on the presentation by my colleagues John Boyne and Sam Milkman. Please note that at the end of our session today, we will answer questions you can submit by using the questions feature in the GoToWebinar platform we are using. You can submit those questions at any point during the presentation, and we will pick a selection of your submissions to answer when we complete our prepared remarks. We are here today to share with you the major findings of Contemporary Music SuperStudy 2. This is the follow-up to the inaugural Contemporary Music SuperStudy we presented roughly a year ago at the Worldwide Radio Summit. Unfortunately, the coronavirus pandemic prevented us from doing the same this year, but we want to take a moment to thank Joel Denver and his team at All Access for their support of this important study. What you're about to see is the result of a massive music test conducted on the same online platform we use for delivering our FACT 360 strategic music tests to our radio station clients. Now, by massive, I mean that we surveyed 1,000 respondents between the ages of 12 and 54 across the United States and Canada. We employed quotas covering age, gender, ethnicity, and geography to ensure that our sample appropriately represents the population. Now, to build the list of titles to be tested, we once again worked with our friends at MRC Data, BDSradio. Using their data, we compiled a list of 2019's most consumed songs based on streaming, sales, and radio airplay. That list revealed some interesting nuggets, including that Lil Nas X's Old Town Road was the #1 song last year in terms of streaming and sales, while Sucker by the Jonas Brothers was last year's #1 song in terms of radio airplay. We then supplemented that list by adding the most consumed songs across 6 genres: pop, country, alternative rock, hip-hop R&B, electronic dance, and Latin, to make sure we had an appropriate representation of each in our study. Finally, we removed the songs that were more than 5 years old. Among 2019's most consumed songs that fit that description were a handful of Queen titles still enjoying a resurgence from the release of the Bohemian Rhapsody film in 2018. Of course, Mariah Carey's All I Want for Christmas Is You and Journey's Don't Stop Believing. But since this is the Contemporary Music SuperStudy, we did not include these titles in our test list. I also want to stress that we did not name this study the New Music SuperStudy. It's called the Contemporary Music SuperStudy, and that distinction is important. This is not a study of brand new music, but is instead a broader study of recent contemporary music. Now, when respondents in our study were played the hook from each title we tested, they were asked to rate it on a scale ranging from like a lot to dislike a lot, or to tell us if they were unfamiliar with it. Using this approach, we calculated 2 scoring methods that we will cover in our presentation today. The first method simply looks at the percentage of all respondents who give the highest rating to a song. These like-a-lot scores provide insights into the level of passion that exists for a specific title or genre of music. More often, however, we will share evaluation average scores, which are calculated based on the full range of responses to each song. These scores provide insights into how mass appeal a title or genre is, because it considers not only those respondents who are passionate supporters, but also those who react negatively or are unfamiliar with the song. Now that you know a little bit more about how we conducted the study, I will turn things over to John, who will share with you the first of our key findings.
So, although this is a test list of the most consumed songs of 2019, they are not all actually from that year. In this era distribution chart of all songs tested, you can see that 52% are from 2019, 38% are from 2018, 8% are from 2017, and there's even a small percentage of titles from 2016 and 2015. Now, let's layer in the era distribution of the top 100 songs as ranked by like-a-lot score, which again is a measure of passion for a song. Note that the top 100 like-a-lot songs in blue lean a little older than the test list in green. So whereas 52% of all songs tested are from 2019, just 38% of the top 100 songs are from 2019. Slightly larger than that is the 40% of top 100 titles from 2018. Meanwhile, in the middle of the chart, whereas only 8% of all songs tested are from 2017, 18% of the top 100 are. There are also even a few top 100 songs from 2016 and 2015. That was based on scoring method number 1. Now let's look at scoring method number 2, which will be used more often in this presentation. Here we will layer in error distribution of the top 100 songs based on evaluation average. Whereas like-a-lot scores only assess passion for a song, evaluation average scores take into account the full spectrum of how people feel about a song, including both the positives and the negatives. With this data, the story largely remains the same. Whether we are looking at the best testing songs based on like-a-lot scores in blue, or the best testing songs based on evaluation scores in red, they lean older than the test lists in green. This is not surprising to us. The older songs that are still being consumed highly enough to qualify for this study have inherently exhibited staying power. Whereas some newer songs may still be developing in familiarity and finding their fan base, these older songs have largely weathered the storm and benefit from having above average familiarity with consumers. So, how does this compare to the findings of last year's study? Let's take a look at a trend. In gray is the era distribution of the top 100 songs from the Contemporary Music SuperStudy 1. And in red is the era distribution of the top 100 songs from the Contemporary Music SuperStudy 2, which you saw on the previous slide. Since these studies are a year apart, we've aligned this chart based on relative era to make it a little easier to make comparisons. So the most recent year for SuperStudy 1 was 2018, while the most recent year for SuperStudy 2 is 2019, and so on. You can see that in relative terms, the best testing music has shifted a tad older. On the left, you can see that the most recent year of music has dipped from 40% to 36% of the top 100. And in the middle, you can see that titles from 3 years ago have risen from 13% to 18% of the top 100. Next, let's go through a similar process, but look at genres instead of eras. Here is the genre distribution of all songs tested. You can see that the list primarily consists of songs from 6 genres. Now, while categorizing songs by genre can be subjective, we've tried to do so in a way that's consistent with Billboard charts and other industry standards. Remember, the test list is based on last year's most consumed songs. So the fact that hip-hop and R&B accounts for 29% of all songs tested here, more than any other genre, reflects the fact that hip-hop and R&B is the genre with the most number of highly consumed songs last year. Next most numerous in the test list are country and pop. Finally, we have alternative rock, dance electronic, and Latin. Now, although this test list was primarily built off of the top songs in streaming sales and airplay last year, as Warren explained earlier, we supplemented the list with top-tier songs from each specific genre. If we had not done so, alternative rock, dance electronic, and Latin would have had smaller shares of the test list than what you see here. Even if they weren't among the most consumed songs overall, we felt it important to include the top-tier song of each genre in the test, and then we could see whether they sink or swim in listeners' evaluations of them. Now let's layer in the genre distribution of the top 100 titles based on like-a-lot score first. Again, this is a measurement that looks at the passion or fan base for each song. Near the center of the chart in blue, you can see that pop has the biggest share of top 100 like-a-lot titles, 32% of the top 100. Notice how much of an overperformance this is. Whereas pop titles account for 18% of all songs tested, they account for 32% of the top 100. As you'll learn as we work our way through this presentation, pop titles tend to be broadly appealing, with wide popularity across various segments of the audience. On the left in blue, you can see that hip-hop and R&B titles account for 30% of the top 100 Like-A-Lot songs. Thus, in this measurement of the songs with the biggest fan bases, the two most prolific genres are pop at 32% and hip-hop R&B at 30%. Country comes in third at 19%, and alternative rock comes in fourth at 12%. Now, as we pivot to our second scoring method, evaluation average, you'll see the story change somewhat. As a reminder, evaluation average scores give us the complete picture of a song's appeal, taking into account both the opinions of the people who like a song, as well as the opinions of those who dislike a song. Near the center of the chart in red, you can see that pop remains on top, with 34% of the top 100 evaluation average songs. But on the left, notice how hip-hop and R&B drops from 30% of the top 100 Like-A-Lot songs to just 19% of the top 100 evaluation average songs. Let's pause for a moment and make sense of that. The 30% figure in blue tells us that 30 of the top 100 songs ranked on Like-A-Lot Passion are hip-hop R&B. This shows that a lot of hip-hop and R&B songs have big fan bases. Meanwhile, the smaller 19% figure in red tells us that just 19 of the top 100 songs ranked on evaluation average are hip-hop and R&B. Evaluation average summarizes how everyone feels about a song, not just how big the fan base is. So the fuller perspective of the evaluation average reveals polarity in how people feel about hip-hop and R&B. There are two sides of the coin. While many hip-hop and R&B songs evoke high passion, they also evoke enough negativity from others to limit their mass appeal. That's why the 19% evaluation average share is smaller than the 30% Like-A-Lot share. A real-world implication of this can be seen in hip-hop and R&B's prominence in on-demand streaming. Many of these songs have big fan bases and thus do well when consumers are choosing specific songs that they want to hear. But the flip side is that because many of these songs are somewhat polarizing, they may not be as widely heard on radio stations that are trying to appeal to as broad an audience as possible. Now, moving on to other genres, to the right of hip-hop and R&B, you can see that country veers the other way to a smaller degree. Note how country accounts for 19% of top 100 Like-A-Lot titles, but 23% of top 100 evaluation average songs. In the evaluation metric of mass appeal, country is in second place. In fourth place is alternative rock at 12%. In fifth place is dance electronic at 8%, which looks better in evaluation average mass appeal than in Like-A-Lot passion. So how does this compare to last year's SuperStudy 1? Here we'll look at a trend. We're looking at the genre distribution of the top 100 songs based on evaluation average scoring, which is a metric we're going to stick with through the rest of the presentation. In gray is last year's SuperStudy 1, in red is this year's SuperStudy 2. Take a look at country. This is where we see the biggest change. The percentage of country songs among the top 100 has nearly doubled, from 12% to 23%. That's a big increase. While we've seen signs in other recent research that contemporary country music seems to have improved, this is a big positive indicator. Another genre that is up, albeit just barely, is alternative rock, which goes from 11% to 12% of the top 100. We also see a small uptick in Latin titles in the top 100, going from 0 to 2%. Meanwhile, there are a few genres which have declined somewhat. On the left, pop is down from 42% to 34% of the top 100, though still in the lead. Hip-hop and R&B is down from 23% to 19%, and dance electronic has dropped from 12% to 8%. Now, while I promise that we'll eventually unveil this year's top songs, hang on, it's going to be exciting. Next, we're going to get into some detail on each of the 6 major genres. We'll take a look at the tastes of fans of each genre, and we'll look at top performing songs of each genre. And we're going to start with hip-hop and R&B. So here in green is the baseline genre distribution of all songs tested. You've seen these numbers before. Next, in red, we're going to layer in the distribution of the top 100 songs among fans of the hip-hop and R&B genre. Not surprisingly, you can see that many of the best testing songs with hip-hop and R&B fans are hip-hop and R&B titles, 57% to be exact. Beyond that, notice how pop overperforms and accounts for 29% of the best testing titles with hip-hop and R&B fans. This is a pattern we'll see play out in other genres as well. In various formats, pop tends to be the next best, most compatible genre. Meanwhile, no other style breaks out of single digits among hip-hop and R&B fans. So let's take a look at the top scoring songs in hip-hop and R&B. And again, the categorization of songs can be subjective, but we've generally followed the lead of Billboard charts and other industry classifications. On the left will be the 5 most popular hip-hop and R&B songs in the study. Number 1 is That's What I Like by Bruno Mars. Number 2 is Rockstar by Post Malone. Number 3 is Better Now by Post Malone. Number 4 is Talk by Khalid. And number 5 is Psycho by Post Malone. That's an impressive showing for Post Malone, 3 out of the top 5. Now, some may describe these top hip-hop and R&B titles as being rather poppy, and that would be an understandable observation. In this and other genres that we're about to see, the most popular titles tend to be rather accessible and broadly appealing. Almost by definition, the biggest hits are the ones whose appeal expand beyond their core lane. Later, we'll see this pattern in other genres as well. Now, does this list look different if we zero in on the fans of the format? On the right, let's take a look at the 5 most popular hip-hop and R&B songs among hip-hop and R&B fans. Note that the 2 lists are largely the same. 4 of the top 5 songs are identical. So the mass market hits of the genre are also highly popular with core fans of the genre. That's an important takeaway, and one that we'll see repeated as we review upcoming genres. Sometimes we hear concerns that a song will lose its appeal with core fans when it gets too big. Such thinking isn't really supported by this research. Songs that become mass market hits generally seem to retain their popularity with core genre fans. Next, let's turn our attention to country music. Here again in green is the baseline genre distribution of all songs tested. And here in red is the genre distribution of the 100 best testing titles among country fans. 57% of the top 100 songs with country fans are country songs. Now, when we dig deeper into that number, we see quite a bit of passion. As compared to other genres, country most fully occupies the tastes of its fans. The next best genre among country fans is pop at 23% of their top 100. This again highlights the breadth of pop music's appeal. Meanwhile, going the other way, on the left you can see how hip hop and R&B accounts for 29% of the test list, but only 5% of the top 100 with country fans. That gap highlights how hip-hop and R&B is not generally compatible with country. Here are the most popular country songs in this study. Meant to Be, 10,000 Hours, Tennessee Whiskey, Tequila, and Speechless. Again, it's no surprise that several of these biggest hits are rather poppy. Several are ones that crossed over from country to CHR and other formats because they are inherently popular. But turning our attention to country fans, you will notice some differences here. Only one of the top 5 country songs is also in the top 5 with country fans. That would be Dan and Shay's Tequila. So let's dig into this a little bit. Meant to Be is the #1 country song overall, but it's not in the top 5 with country fans. So where is it? Number 9, not bad. Still a good score, a very good score with country fans. 10,000 Hours is the #2 country song overall, but where is it among country fans? Number 7, just a couple positions below the top 5. So it's not like the country core is really rejecting some of these mass appeal hits. They're just a little lower than what made the top 5. But what about Chris Stapleton's Tennessee Whiskey? That's definitely not a pop country song, yet it is among those with the highest popularity. Tennessee Whiskey ranks number 38 among country fans. Relative to these others, that's pretty low. Not terrible, not a bad reception among country fans, but not top tier. This indicates that many of the fans of Tennessee Whiskey come from outside the mainstream country fan base. And we saw the same thing in last year's study. Next, let's look at pop music. Among pop fans, 42% of the top 100 songs are pop. Then we see some diversity of tastes, which reflects how pop's popularity is evident among other genre fan bases. In red, you can see that 21% of the top titles with pop fans are country, 14% are hip-hop and R&B, and 11% are alternative rock. What are the best testing pop songs in this study? Shape of You by Ed Sheeran, There's Nothing Holding Me Back by Shawn Mendes, Someone You Loved by Louis Capaldi, Can't Stop the Feeling by Justin Timberlake, and Perfect by Ed Sheeran. And how about among pop fans? Very similar. 4 of the 5 songs are the same in both lists. Alternative rock is up next. In the red box, you can see that 18% of the top 100 songs with alternative rock fans are alternative rock. Now, as a smaller genre in the test, that number cannot mathematically be as big as we saw for some of the larger genres. The numbers don't work. But even taking that into account, 18% is still pretty low. There just isn't a lot of alternative rock material breaking through at this time, even among fans of the genre. Instead, we see a lot of pop. That's the big number on the screen. Among alternative rock fans, 43% of the top 100 are pop songs. So what are the most popular alternative rock songs? We've got Believer by Imagine Dragons, Thunder by Imagine Dragons, High Hopes by Panic at the Disco, Feel It Still by Portugal the Man, and Broken by Lovely the Band. And among alternative rock fans, once again, 4 of the 5 are the same. So as we've now seen in a few genres, the biggest hits of the genre also tend to be highly popular among the core fans of the genre. Next, we'll go to dance and electronic music. Again, as a smaller genre, there simply aren't enough dance electronic titles in the study to yield a big percentage here. That said, even in this context, 12% is a low number. There just isn't a lot of depth here, even among fans. So more so than in any other genre, dance electronic fans are interested in other material. 41% of their top 100 are pop titles, 24% are hip hop and R&B. Here are the best testing dance and electronic songs. The middle, Something Just Like This, Close to Me, Happier, and SOS. And among format fans, once again, we see a similar top 5. 4 of the 5 are the same. The last genre we'll take a look at is Latin. Among Latin music fans, 22% of the top 100 songs are Latin. And in the context of Latin's small percentage of the test list, that's actually a good number. Beyond the Latin titles, we see that hip-hop and R&B on the left account for 30%, and pop in the middle accounts for 29% of the top 100 songs with Latin music fans. The once ubiquitous Despacito is the #1 Latin song in the study. And among genre fans, Mia is #1. Meanwhile, Despacito is not in the top 5 of Latin music fans. So where is it? #9. Not top 5, but still quite popular with fans of the genre. Next up, Sam will show you how contemporary music tastes look among different groups of people.
Thanks, John. As we dove deeper into the data, we looked at the best testing songs by various demographics: gender, age, ethnicity, and geography. And that reveals some very interesting findings. I want to share some insights on the best testing genres when we look at the data from several demographic angles. But no matter what demo we look at, you will see pop as the common thread, a big part of the top 100, no matter how we slice the data. But let me show you where some of the results differ. Once again, what you're seeing on the screen in green is the genre distribution of the songs, all the songs that we tested. Men, in blue on your screen, have a large amount of pop in their top 100, 35%, and only 20% hip-hop, R&B, and 19% country. Whereas women, on your screen in red, also have a lot of pop, 36%. There's that common thread, and a significant amount of country, 28%, more so than men at 19.
How many?
Looking at the results by age, consumers 12 to 34 in blue on your screen have a lot of pop.
Yeah.
Have a lot of pop and hip hop and R&B among the songs they rate best, and very little country, only 7%. Consumers 35 to 54, now in red, the older half of our participants, look very different. 42% of their top 100 is country, 31% pop, and very little hip hop and R&B, a mere 9%. So country is more prevalent in the best testing songs of women and consumers 35-54. Hip hop and R&B more prominent among consumers 12 to 34, the younger half of our participants. And we also see interesting differences by ethnicity. First, 2/3 of the best testing songs among black consumers are hip hop and R&B. On your screen now in blue. The remainder is mainly pop, 21%. Pop, again, represents that common thread across all demographics. The top 100 among Hispanics, now on your screen in gray, is mainly pop, hip hop and R&B, and Latin, kind of split across those three. And the best testing songs among other consumers in red includes a large percentage of country, 39%, pop, 30%, and far less hip hop and R&B, Off to the left of your screen, that red 12%. One more demographic view. We asked people whether they live in a place they would characterize as urban, suburban, or rural. And we want to note the differences in the highest rated contemporary songs among these three groups. Urban consumers, on the screen in blue, you see that pop and hip hop and R&B dominate their top 100. Whereas suburban consumers in gray, for them, pop and country make up a large percentage of the top 100, and there's significantly less hip hop and R&B in gray on the left-hand side of your screen. Rural consumers, now on the screen in red, nearly half of the songs in the top 100 of rural consumers are country, 48%, and 27% are country. Only 9% of their top 100 is hip hop and R&B. So, country is huge with rural consumers, does well with suburban, but poorly with urban. Pop goes the other way, does especially well among urban consumers and also good among suburban. One more thing on this slide. Note the percentage of alternative rock towards the center of your screen is rather uniform across these three geographic characterizations, 10 to 12% of the top 100 in every case. So unlike country and pop, where we see dramatic geographic differences, that's not the case with alternative rock. Let's take a look at these results from a different perspective now, consumption. Here I'd like to show you the genre distribution among light music purchasers and heavy music purchasers. First, a definition of purchasers. Purchases include money spent on streaming services, digital downloads, and physical sales. And we broke people out by how much they spend in a typical month. The big difference is country, as you'll see through this section. On your screen in blue, light music purchasers. And they have large amounts of country and pop in their top 100 and a smaller amount of hip hop and R&B, whereas heavy music consumers in red have an even larger amount of pop, slightly more hip hop and R&B than lighter consumers, and far less country. So, among people who spend less money on music, country represents a larger percentage of the songs in their top 100. Next, I'd like to tell you about the profile of the top 100 among daily radio listeners, daily streaming listeners, and daily podcast listeners. The top 100 of daily radio listeners in blue includes a large percentage of pop and country, and a slightly smaller amount of hip-hop and R&B. Whereas the best-selling songs among daily streaming listeners includes much more hip-hop and R&B and far less country, only 15% you see in gray. Pop, once again, is the common ground. This is the profile that you are likely to see when you look at streaming data. A lot of hip-hop and R&B and pop, but not as much country. The top 100 among daily podcast listeners, here in red, looks very much like that of daily streaming listeners. Not much differences between these two groups. And finally, when we take a deeper look at consumers who prefer various streaming services, we find interesting differences among those who prefer Pandora, Spotify, and YouTube. Consumers who prefer Pandora in blue have 39% country in their top 100, 26% pop, and significantly less hip-hop and R&B, only 17% on the left of your screen there in blue. Those who prefer Spotify and YouTube, well, among them you see a very large percentage of pop, a good amount of hip-hop and R&B, and very little country in both cases. 9%, 11%. You see that in the second category there. People who prefer Pandora have much more country songs that they rate best. People who prefer Spotify and YouTube have more pop and hip-hop R&B in their top 100 songs. That's the difference. And now I'd like to turn things back over to John Boyne, who's going to tell you about some of the best and worst testing contemporary songs.
So here we are. It's time to unveil the best testing songs of Contemporary Music SuperStudy 2. You've already seen some top performers within each genre, and you've gotten some clues about how songs that are a couple of years old tend to do pretty well, and how pop tends to do pretty well. But you have not yet seen which songs come out on top overall. So let's count down the top 10 most popular songs. Number 10, Girls Like You by Maroon 5 featuring Cardi B. Number 9, Perfect by Ed Sheeran. Number 8, Can't Stop the Feeling by Justin Timberlake. Number 7, That's What I Like by Bruno Mars. Number 6, Something Just Like This by the Chainsmokers and Coldplay. Number 5, Someone You Loved by Louis Capaldi. Number 4, The Middle by Zedd featuring Maren Morris. Number 3, Believer by Imagine Dragons. Number 2, There's Nothing Holding Me Back by Shawn Mendes. And the top song of Contemporary Music SuperStudy 2 is Shape of You by Ed Sheeran, a mega popular song by a mega popular artist. This song benefits from being very well known and from being exceptionally well liked among those who know it. High familiarity, high positives, low negatives, broad appeal. That's a recipe for success. Congratulations, Ed. Now, let's give out another superlative. This goes to the artist with the highest number of songs in the top 100. Interestingly, the winner here did not have a song in the top 10. Post Malone had 8 of the top 100 songs, well ahead of any other artist. Congratulations, Post. Now, what's the fun of a music test ranker if we only look at the top? Let's go way, way down to the bottom to find our least popular song. Here, we will find a song with massive on-demand video streaming numbers, substantial on-demand audio streaming and sales, but virtually no radio airplay. Here, we will find a song that clocked in at number 75 in Billboard's year-end Hot 100. Here, we will find Baby Shark, which is by far the least popular song in Contemporary Music SuperStudy 2.
Thanks, John. And thanks again for joining us for today's webinar. Once again, I want to give shout outs to our friends at BDSradio and All Access for their assistance with making this study happen. In a moment, John, Sam, and I will answer a few of the questions you have submitted during the presentation. You still have a moment or two to type those into the question feature if you want to submit one. Now, before we take your questions, I do want to let you know that our website, ColemanInsights.com, will be a great source of more details from the Contemporary Music SuperStudy 2 in the weeks to come. We will post a recording of today's webinar next Tuesday. So if you want to relive this again or let some of your colleagues who did not get to join us today hear it, they'll be able to do that starting next Tuesday. And we will also soon make available the song-by-song data from our study for free. Also, on our website, if you're not already a subscriber, you can sign up for our Tuesdays with Coleman blog. Over the next 4 weeks, we will publish blogs that cover some of the findings we presented today in some more detail, and we'll also reveal some additional findings beyond what you saw in today's session. So, Jay, if you are ready, John, Sam, and I should be able to take a couple of questions from our attendees. So let us know some of the best questions that you've been asked, and we'll do our best to give you some answers.
All right, awesome. First question is, how did you determine which bucket of format fans to place people in? So how was that determined? Was it montages, a verbal descriptor? How was someone described as a fan?
Yeah, good question. So it was determined based on a series of questions evaluating artist groups of kind of the biggest artists of various genres. So it didn't have to do with whether you were young or old or male or female or where you lived. It was based solely on your interest in the format.
Okay. Next question is, you mentioned that you surveyed both Americans and Canadians. Did you see a difference in the data collected between participants from USA and Canada?
Yeah, we did see some differences. I won't say that they are tremendous, and we felt that they were not different enough that it made sense to put it into today's webinar. We are going to reveal some more details about U.S. versus Canadian respondents in a release in a couple of weeks. One thing I could tell you off the top of my head, probably the biggest difference we saw is that hip-hop R&B performs much better south of the border than it does north of the border.
Okay. With the popularity and performance of the hip hop and R&B genre, why hasn't Top 40 Pop Radio embraced hip hop and R&B as it did in the early 2000s? Oh,
John, we're not hearing you.
Yeah.
No.
Okay, how about now?
There you go.
All right. So I think it probably has to do with the differences in scoring measures, kind of how you look at a song's popularity. You may recall earlier on in the presentation, when we're only looking at the fan base, kind of the core passion for music, hip hop and R&B does really well. It's right there with pop as kind of the most numerous category. And so that's where you're going to see a lot of hip hop and R&B doing well, say in on-demand settings where you're picking exactly what you want to hear. But the flip side of that, that we saw in that earlier data, is that when you look at the full spectrum of how kind of a mass audience feels about hip hop and R&B, a lot of those titles come down to earth in their popularity. I wouldn't say that there's tons and tons of negativity, but there's enough negativity. There's above average kind of dislike scores to pull down the mass appeal of that of a lot of those titles. And so it can make sense depending on what your goal is. If you're on demand, you can play whatever it is they want. But if you're a radio station that's trying to cast a broad net, like a top 40 station, I can see how some of those titles will work really well, but others may not, because they're just not as mass appeal.
Okay. Next question is, why is it that you feel dance electronic has trended down in the CHR space?
I don't think we have a real good explanation for why that's happened, but we are seeing a downtrend. The bottom line is there aren't a tremendous number of dance electronic titles making it into a study like this to begin with, because consumption of it is not nearly as high as we see for other genres. But the bottom line is it's just gone down. We see fewer titles from this genre testing well this year than we did last year. And that does line up with what we're seeing in the research that we do for a lot of radio stations in particular that, do have dance and electronic music as a component of their strategies.
This next question is a question about classifying genres. So the question is about Drake, that he's a big hip hop pop crossover. Didn't come up, didn't see it a lot, at least in this particular presentation. So did we ask participants how the particular genres were classified, or how did that work?
Yeah, that's another good question. So we touched on this along the way, but it's worth repeating that for classification of songs, obviously there's subjectivity there, and there's a lot of blurring a line. We tried to kind of objectively follow industry categorization. So looking at what Billboard says, what's on what type of Billboard chart, looking at MRC coding, and just tried to follow that. Drake was indeed primarily considered hip hop and R&B. That's where his appeal was coming from. And even though you didn't see a lot of Drake, I think he was in the top 5 list with format fans. God's Plan made it. He was actually quite prominently if you were to look a little more broadly than we did in this presentation. He had a number of songs that weren't maybe at the tip top, but that did well.
And again, you'll be able to see those details when we release the song by song data in a couple of weeks.
Another question is about, it's a format question, your thoughts on alternative in general and kind of where it's heading, and is rock right behind it? Are you seeing a decline there?
Yeah, alternative rock or alternative is one of those genres where we look at and we go, God, I wish we had thought to do this study years ago, because I think the trends would be fascinating. We all know intuitively and from other metrics that there have been periods of time where rock or alternative was much bigger than it is now. The reality is, whether you're looking at streaming data, whether you're looking at sales data, whether you're looking at radio airplay, or whether you're looking at a study like this, it all kind of leads to the same place, in that it's not a great time for alternative rock. There are some hits. Thank goodness there's Imagine Dragons, but there's not a lot of depth there. As for where it goes from here, I don't know.
But I think it is worth pointing out that, the presence of alternative rock in our top 100 this year is very similar. I think it was up 1 percentage point, if I remember right, versus last year. Mm-hmm. So I don't think we see anything in the data that suggests that alternative rock is weakening, but we do theorize that it's probably not as strong as it was had we done this research a decade ago.
Okay, next question is, what was the most surprising to you in this data?
I would say country. I would say the rise of country. It wasn't completely surprising, because we do a lot of research and we've seen indications that country, which from our perspective had kind of dipped and was in a lull, maybe climbing out of that somewhat. But to see it kind of double its share of the top 100 titles, that was surprising.
All right. So the last question would be, aside from call out and library tests, how would you rank, or what are your thoughts on additional music data available in terms of effectiveness in assessing a song's value to our audiences?
That's a great question. The interesting thing is, if you're programming a radio station today, the number of tools that you have available to you to make music decisions has exploded versus, even just 10 years ago. Obviously, we're going to be a little biased here. We're in the business of doing music research. We have a separate division of our company called Integrate Research that does new music research for many radio stations around the country. And, we still believe that testing songs and finding out how consumers feel about them, not just whether they like them and don't like them, but whether they're tired of them and whether they're consistent with the brand that you're trying to program for, those things are all real important. Now, that said, I think there's a lot of other great tools out there. If I'm programming anything that involves contemporary music, I want to look at what's going on in the streaming world. I don't think that programming based on streaming data is very advisable, because, as John pointed out, in the streaming environment, you're really only seeing the positives. The people who are seeking out music on demand, you don't see the negatives. You don't see the people who are not listening to a song. But where streaming data can be really valuable is seeing what things are generating some interest and enthusiasm from consumers who may match the target of your radio station. So use that kind of information to then go ahead and take a look at it in your own station's music research. So I think, using all of these tools in concert with one another is actually very powerful. But again, admitting our lack of objectivity perhaps in this area, ultimately we find that testing the music with consumers is still the most important part of the process. So Jay, I think we're pretty much wrapped up with questions. So again, I want to thank everybody for attending today. We were really excited to see the enthusiastic response to the Contemporary Music SuperStudy 2 based on all the people who signed up. And I do want to remind you again that you'll be able to go to ColemanInsights.com Over the next couple of weeks, we'll be releasing some more information from the study, more details and more interesting findings. And again, the next 4 weeks, our Tuesdays with Coleman blog will feature a lot of those findings in some more detail. So on behalf of John Boyne and Sam Milkman and everybody here at Coleman Insights, along with our moderator, Jay Naklis, thanks again. We hope everybody stays safe and stays healthy. Hopefully things will return to normal sometime in the near future, and we hope to see you all soon. Thanks again and have a good day.